All right. Let's see. Yes.
This clicker is not working.
Okay.
So, do you want me to do it for you?
I
or
would.
Do you want, okay.
If that's okay, I'll just give you the signal. For sure. All right. I think I've got that. All right. Thank you so much. This is fantastic. All right, I've turned it on. Can you hear me okay in the back? Is that all right? Good, good, good. I want to I just would like to, before we get going, I would love to thank Melanie and all of the members of the Coweta County Master Gardeners Association for putting this together. This is awesome. Thank y'all so much, Melanie. This is spectacular. This is. I know this takes an enormous amount of organization, of planning, and of motivation, and Melanie is a motivational speaker. So at any rate, we don't have to worry about that. But I wanted everybody to take the first moment to look at the arrangements in the center of your tables. I get excited about this because this is all from gardens. This is all in bloom right now, and it emphasizes the point that we're trying to make so often in the fall, is that too often we think the fall is a blank time in the garden. It needn't be. It needn't be. Look at the color that's on there. Some of these plants are native, some of them are introduced, but all of them fall into tough plants for the Southern Garden category. No question about it. And so I am excited about what's there. I appreciate so much all of the work and everything that has been going into planning this event. And I just want to thank all of you for being here. The second thing I want to do is I want to take a picture. I learned this technique from Steve Bender a while back. He would say, Jason, I always like to take pictures of the crowd attending an event at the beginning of the event for two reasons. He said, for one reason, I can remember, and for the second reason, it's generally the only time everybody's smiling. So, any of you have heard Steve Bender speak, you know he is a fun speaker, no two ways about it. But I want to thank you so much for the invitation to come. When we were talking about topics, one of the things that I like to focus on is the fact that fall is for gardening. And I saw a lot of hands go up when Melanie said, hey, who's here for the first time? If it's your first time to visit or to come to a program here, raise your hand. And we saw so many people raising their hands. And so I want to start with just a little bit of an introduction to why are we all gathered in this room and we're filled from one end to the other. Why are we talking about gardening in October going into November? Traditionally, most of us have always planted March, April, May. Spring is king, right? And this is a subject that Alan and Melanie have been kind enough to let me come over for I think 12 years in that range and talk about, and I appreciate so much the relationships that I have been able to develop during that time. And I feel like I'm an unofficial staff member of the Backyard Gardeners Association for sure. So yes, I appreciate that. But why are we here today? Why are we talking about gardening? And I want to make it very, very simple. And then I want to jump right into talking about what's in bloom, what's going on right now. What can you have in your garden that's going to look great right now that you don't have to pamper? Our organization, our plant nursery, I want to give you just a little bit of background as we jump into that, and then we'll do the Q&A, as Melanie said, and then we'll finish up with the plant sales. But I grew up in a family that gardened like many of you did. I grew up also in a family with an extension person. My dad worked for the Extension Service. First job was at Texas A&M, and then his second job was the University of Georgia, and then he moved to Auburn, and that's where I grew up. So my dad worked as the fruit specialist for the state of Alabama with Auburn University's Extension Service. So from the time I was in we moved there when I was 7, 8 years old. So from the time I was 7 or 8 years old all the way through high school, every summer, as soon as I got out of school, I jumped in the car with my dad and I traveled all over the state of Alabama. And if your dad is the fruit specialist, it means a lot of really good things. We were in Bruton, Alabama, because Bruton is the blueberry capital of Alabama. And then in July, we were in Chilton County. Do you know what we grow in Chilton County? Absolutely. And the research station is just 6 miles down the road, just 3 miles down the road from where our nursery and farm is now. So then in August, before we went back to school, we'd be in North Alabama because that's where the biggest portion of our apple and pear industry are. So I got to go to meetings just like this as a little guy. I got to be in professional fruit orchards. I got to taste every dessert that's made at a blueberry festival. And I like them all. I like them all. And so, but I got exposed to all of that at an early age, and it helped me figure out I really wanted to, when I grew up, do something that could involve being out of doors, the work aspect, and then, but also could incorporate educational opportunities. And so I was very fortunate to have an opportunity to go to Auburn University. But the other thing it meant, if your dad is the fruit specialist for the state of Alabama, it not only means great opportunities to go meet professional fruit growers, to be in orchards and to be in meetings and to taste blueberry desserts. It also means my dad's garden philosophy has always been very simple. My dad believes if you cannot eat it, don't grow it. Right? Did any of you guys grow up in a family like that? So when he also felt like anything less than an acre of vegetable garden was a waste of time because he had a son that could hoe up and down those roads, right? But I learned that acre of vegetable garden produced so much in abundance that not only could we enjoy and harvest and eat fresh vegetables out of that, there was enough to freeze and to can. I learned about that component. And then there was still enough for me to put in my little red wagon and take it around the neighborhood. And I learned at an early age that people would give you quarters for tomatoes, right? Now it would be like $5 for a tomato, right? With inflation. But it helped me kind of connect it. And I thought, oh yeah, when I grow up, I'm doing something that can involve this aspect. So I got an opportunity to go to Auburn University, and I felt like enough time in the edible side, fruit and vegetable garden. I was ready to go to do something on the ornamental side. And I got my undergraduate degree there in landscape design. And then when I finished, I had some wonderful opportunities. I've mentioned this before. Tina and Johanna in the back worked with a great classmate of mine named Chris Smith. And Chris and I were undergraduates together at Auburn. And when we were in school, there were 100 undergraduate students. And then at graduation, 50 boys, 50 girls, 5 jobs for every single undergraduate, 5 job opportunities. It is equally as good, if not better now. So if you have an interest in horticulture or you know someone, this is a great field to be into. There are limitless opportunities. But I couldn't make up my mind which one of those 5 jobs that I wanted to do. And so when you're ever in that predicament, you go to your professors. Thankfully, they know the answer. They put their arm around you and say, just keep taking classes till you figure it out. You know? It was as simple as that. So I went, way back then, we were still on the quarter system at Auburn. We hadn't moved to the semester system. That dates me. So I went home, and I remember telling my mom and dad, I said, oh, I've got a diploma, no problem. I've got this degree. I don't know what I want to be, but my professor said, just keep taking classes. And my mom and dad were, of course, so wise at that point, and they said, well, we've heard of many students that are in this kind of predicament that they get the degree, they don't know exactly what they want to do, they just go out and get a job, any job. Just get a job. And they didn't stop there, Melanie. They said many of those same students move out of the house also. Get a job. This is the progression, Jason. This is the way you go. Get a job, get out of the house. Anyway, I thought, well, that's nuts. That sounds crazy. I'm not processing that. But graduate school, on the other hand, does sound good. But I applied around, and I was very fortunate to get an opportunity to be accepted at Texas A&M University. So, you know, if you're going to be a graduate student, you go, and part of your job is to go visit that school, to visit the professors, meet with them, and figure out who can you develop a rapport with. Who are you going to be able to help complete their research while you're completing your degree? And I met a whole host of them, and I was very fortunate to meet one named Dr. Bill Welch. And Dr. Welch at that time had written several books, including titles such as Antique Roses for the South. We're going to talk about that subject today. And then he wrote another one called Perennial Garden Color. And then he wrote a third one called The Southern Heirloom Garden. So that gives you kind of a description of what his interests are. Here's a guy who's writing about and gardening with our grandmother's plants, right? His interest is not in the newest introduction of azalea or camellia. And I think about over the last 30 years that we have been in business, how many new plants have come out. You think about the branding that has hit our industry. You can't walk into a nursery right now without seeing plants that are grown in white pots, say proven winners, like the limelight hydrangea, the little lime, the oh gosh, vanilla strawberry, the pinky winky. There's all these great hydrangeas that are coming out that are brand new, and many of them very, very good. And then you endless summer series of hydrangeas. Knockout roses were occurring at that time when I was graduating. And so I asked Dr. Welch, I said, why are you gardening with and writing about these plants that our grandmothers grew when it seems like all the excitement with all these other professors is here? And he said, well, I can answer the question in one sentence, or for the next 2 years, if you think you're up for a challenge, you can come and garden with me and you can figure it out for yourself. Well, he and his wife Diane had moved a beautiful 1900s Victorian home to where it now sits at the foothills of the hill country in Texas, a little tiny town called Round Top. And I thought, this is too golden of an opportunity. This was an apprenticeship. And every gardener in this room knows we don't learn simply by reading. You got to get on your hands and knees and get in that garden, right? You got to get dirt under your fingernails. So I jumped at that opportunity, and over the next 2 years, I worked with Dr. Welch in what he was creating, which was a cottage garden. And a cottage garden continues to be, thankfully, one of the most popular styles of gardening that we can create today. And every magazine, it seems like if you go through the grocery store aisle, says how to recreate that cottage garden, how to develop a cottage garden. Well, if you're not familiar with it, a cottage garden basically consists of everything that you like: bulbs, perennials, reseeding annuals, we're going to talk about, shrubs, vegetables if you like, and then, of course, roses. And I think the best definition that I've ever read about a cottage garden is it's just organized chaos. Right? I think if you have the opportunity when you leave here today to go through this demo garden just up the hill from us, you've got to go. That is an illustration of how beautiful a cottage style of garden can be and how much color you can have in a fall garden with tough plants. At any rate, so I asked Dr. Welch, and for this opportunity, I gardened with him over the next 2 years, and I had the time of my life. I learned all about the style of gardening that he was interested in, the heirloom plants, and I will never forget coming up within a month of graduation, Dr. Welch called me into his office. He said, Jason, your mother's called. She wants to know if you know what you want to be when you grow up. And I said, I'm moving back home to Alabama, and I'm going to start a nursery that can be devoted to the two things that I've learned so much. I want to devote a nursery to tough plants for southern gardens. I learned the answer to the question of why Dr. Welch was gardening with the plants our grandmothers grew. It was simple. These plants have survived through years when there were droughts, through years when there were floods, through years when there were late spring freezes, through years when there were hurricanes, through years when you had some climatic event that was extreme. And if you remember 30 years ago, it didn't used to be all of those things in 1 year. It seems like now, I mean, we wouldn't even think anything about it, right? Just think about this past year, and that's one of the questions I want to ask you. We had the polar plunge, it was called, because they'd already used the polar vortex that we saw a few years back, right? And then we had the late March freeze, so I want to ask some of you about that a little bit later in our program. But at any rate, the answer to my question, I originally asked Dr. Welch, was he was writing with and gardening with the plants our grandmothers grew because they're still here today because of their ability to survive and thrive. And that list is going to include, that we're talking about today, some native plants of the Southeast. That's going to include some plants that were introduced from regions of Asia where their climate is very similar to ours. And it's going to include plants that have been introduced from around the world where the climate is similar to ours, the soil types are similar, and they thrive. And so when I told Dr. Welch what I wanted to do, he said, I think it's a great idea. And he sent me away, thankfully, with armloads of cuttings. And we ended up in the north end of Chilton County because, thankfully, I picked peaches really well when I was growing up. And I picked them really well for a farmer named Marvin Durbin. And if any of you ever been over our way on I-65 going up in Clanton, which is our, that's the capital of our county, you would say, the county seat, it's a large peach growing region. And Mr. Durbin was a teacher and then later on a principal, but always a peach grower. And if there was any new variety or any new technique to try, Mr. Durbin was going to try it. And he was kind enough to offer me an opportunity. If I would come back home to Alabama, help him diversify his fruit nursery, he would sell me some land to start that nursery. So that's why we've ended up in the north end of Chilton County. If you get an opportunity to visit us, we are on top of what was Mr. Durbin's plum orchard. And so It's about 1.1 miles from the interstate, so it's easy access, and that's how we've ended up there. Our whole approach to the gardening and to this industry is twofold. We are doing our very best to achieve an educational goal with our nursery, and the two efforts that we use are by planting everything we grow in a garden setting. I would like for you to be able to see what this Georgia aster looks like. This is a wonderful southeastern native aster, which looks beautiful in this container. But if we were at the nursery today, we could see that in a clump where it's been planted for 5 years and where it's shoulder high in that range and has thickened up and filled out nicely. So our display gardens are teaching tools. We're learning from them, and we like for you to come and visit and walk through, and you learn from them. In those gardens, as Melanie mentioned, just like this demo garden up here, we're not using an irrigation system. We are wanting to get the plants established and give them a test of neglect. And in that way, you can decide, and I can decide, how well did they handle the polar plunge? How well did they handle the drought that we are currently in? How well are they performing? And it will surprise you at how good a garden can be with the right selection of plants. And that's what we feel like is our job. The second effort of achieving an educational goal is we host workshops and classes at our nursery. Our website, petalsfromthepast.com, has got a whole list of those. And we would love for you to join us for those programs like this one. They're at no charge. We would love for you to have an interest. If it's a plant you have, or a topic you have an interest, we would love for you to join us. I'm very fortunate in our business that my dad is my full-time partner. He retired from Auburn University in 2000, and I hired him immediately. So I want you to ask him, Melanie's asked him this before, if he's not working harder for less than he ever has. But I'm getting a little bit of that back from hoeing up and down those rows of that vegetable garden, for sure. It was a package deal. When I hired my dad, I hired my mom at the same time, and she does all of our propagation. So we grow about 80% of all of our plant material there at our nursery using the display gardens for teaching tools, but those are also our mother plants. That's where we propagate them from. Our thinking is that if you've driven from Noonan, Georgia, and you see something in bloom, if it was grown in Jemison, Alabama, which is more similar to your climate than if I were to buy that plant in from the Northeast, you can be more confident that it's going to be acclimated to your home garden. In addition to my mom and my dad, I was very fortunate while I was a graduate student. Most important decision I made was I met a young lady named Shelley, who's the most knowledgeable plants person I have ever met. I convinced her to marry me and move back home to Alabama to start the nursery, and she and I continued to look for the oil I promised would be on the property. So at any rate, 30 years, we're not giving up. We're not giving up. But she's a native Texan, and that was the biggest thing. Are there any native Texans here today? Okay, all right. So see these ladies in the back here. They believe the world was built around Texas. It's a native Texas thing. So for her to marry me and leave, that was pretty big. So one of Shelley's many jobs is to go find great plants that are at risk of being forgotten about. So with our nursery, Petals from the Past, we're looking for the plants our grandmothers grew, but we're also looking for just tough plants. And so Shelley goes to old home sites. She goes to other nurseries. We've got a great example with the current and previous directors of the Oakland cemetery here. Those are wonderful hunting sites for great official plants. Now, we're not encouraging anybody to go to Oakland and hunt today, but they are great places where you can see plants that are extremely tough. But the cemeteries that Shelley goes to are not ones that would have a staff. They're the ones where nobody's taking care of it, and yet these plants thrive and deserve a second look. So Shelley travels all over the Southeast looking for these plants, and she's uniquely qualified. My wife can identify a plant at 55 miles per hour. So wherever we go, you gentlemen, if she says stop the car, we stop the car. And it doesn't matter whether we're in North Carolina, whether we're in Georgia, or whether we're in East Texas, or anywhere in between. When you stop and you ask a Southern gardener about the plants, you come away with armloads. Southern gardeners share, and they want you to have that plant, but what's more important, they want you to know the story behind that plant. How did it come to their area? How did it come to Coweta County? And then they can share with you how to care for it. And so Shelley collects the plants, we bring them back home with our formula. I put them into the gardens, I give them a test of neglect, and if they can survive that after 2 to 3 years, we begin to propagate them and then reintroduce them. So that's our whole formula. And I'm very thankful over the last 30 years, it's been a really successful formula that has allowed us to evaluate and make sure that we can maintain some diversity in our landscapes. My personal philosophy is that our Southern gardening heritage is every bit as rich as our architectural heritage, and it's worth preserving. So if you see some plants, if you see some things that are in gardens and you can get seed or you can safely collect during daylight hours, preferably. You know, we're talking gardeners here. We all like to collect. My wife has probably been banned from 2 or 3 botanical gardens at least. She's at least searched upon leaving any of those for sure. Her picture's up on the wall in there. But at any rate, so we're going to talk about fall for gardening. I've drifted away from it, but bringing it back to why are we talking about it right now? Because we live, thankfully, in the South, and we have the right conditions. What is happening right now? When you walked out this morning and you had to go back in and put a small sweater on, was that not nice? Wasn't it wonderful? After you've gone through this past summer, and I'm in the state right next to you, I know how many days you had in 100 degrees. I know that we've been on a long stretch without rainfall. So when we get these cooler air temperatures, and we see in the forecast, thankfully, lows in the 50s and highs not getting out of the 70s, this is very encouraging. And you feel better, but have you noticed the plant material, your plants in your garden, actually breathing a sigh of relief? And that's air temperature. So air temperature is moving in and it's cooling off and it's getting just right. Not only for less stress on you and me, but less stress on our existing plant material. But that's air temperature. What about the soil temperature? When I left the nursery yesterday, the air temperature in the morning was in the low 50s, but the soil temperature, as reflected by my soil thermometer, if you now officially all know a plant nerd, and if you need to know what the soil temperature is, anytime you can give me an email or a call, I'll be glad to tell you. But the soil temperature is 76 degrees. Now, think about the seed packs that you've bought over the years. Have you noticed always that it tells you what the optimum seed soil temperature is? That's an important component, not just for seed germination, but for root growth. Anytime that the soil temperature is above 40 degrees, you're going to have root growth going on. And the soil temperature is buffered. So it doesn't fluctuate like the air temperature. The air temperature this morning, according to Weatherman, was 50 degrees when we walked out this morning, and it's going to warm up to 72 only. That is a perfect day, in my opinion. But the soil temperature is 76. And it'll be 76 at noon, and it'll be 76 at 3 p.m. The soil temperature slowly cools as we go into the winter. So if we're planting anything today, shrub, vegetable, tree, you're planting it into a soil that's warm. That's like a nice warm blanket. And all the signals, as day length shortens and you get cooler air temperatures, all the signals are there to tell that plant to go dormant above the soil line, but not below the soil line. In a nice warm soil, root growth can continue to occur. So if you're planting a tree today, that tree is getting all the signals to start losing its leaves, to start going dormant on the top. But if you put that root system into the nice warm soil, it's going to start making root growth. And it can continue making root growth through October, November, December, January, and not have to put energy into making leaves and stems and flowers. So that plant gets to do one thing at a time and do it really well, as opposed to when we spring plant. The majority of us are March, April, May. We're spring planting, and then that plant has to make root growth, shoot growth, root growth, shoot growth. And it's as in our climate, as the temperatures are rising and the rainfall is becoming less prevalent. Typically, rainfall here begins in earnest in November. Do you know in Noonan, Georgia, you get 55 inches of annual rainfall? Would it not be spectacular if it could fall 1 inch per week? That's not asking. That is not asking too much. It would be perfect. You could throw away the irrigation systems. 1 inch of rainfall per week is all we need. On the soil that you garden in is very much like the soil that I garden in, but it doesn't happen that way. So we get these cool air temperatures, warm soil temperature, looking to rainfall to begin in November. So for planting today, we need to be responsible for watering deeply anything that we've planted 2 times per week. And then we can gradually taper that down as we move into the rainfall season, and then we can roll that hose up by Thanksgiving and we'll put the plants to bed. Root growth keeps going. It's getting watered by rainfall. And do your plants know the difference between rainfall and hose water? Absolutely. So contrast that. The majority of planting is March, April, May. We're planting into the hottest, driest part. We kill ourselves dragging that hose around the gardens through June, July, and August just to barely keep the thing alive till we make it to fall. And then we stop. So we really have it in reverse. And if you can get your mind wrapped around that, it makes, to me, the most common sense. It's less stress on you, less stress on the plants if you're fall gardening, and it has everything to do with where you and I live, for sure. And why do we spring plant? Does anybody got an idea? I have a theory. Okay, I'm going to tell you my theory. It doesn't matter if winter is only 2 weeks, we're all depressed, right? It's too long. 2 weeks of winter is too much. And so we're all ready to plant. That's why people come to the nursery in February and ask about tomato plants. You're in zone 8. It's going to be 26 next week. They're like, I don't care. I just need to get out and plant something. I'll come back and replace it again the next year. And so, or the next month. So at any rate, I think it's part of our upbringing. It was spring plant, fall harvest forever. So that's kind of the thinking. But if we can get to thinking about our climate and our environment ever changing as it is, we can take advantage of it and make it less stress on you and less stress on the plant box. And we'll get into what's going on. Tough plants for southern gardens. In this picture, one of the things that I like is it's featuring, this is a spring shot. The orange flowers at the base of that shot are a California poppy that's very much at home in Alabama and Georgia. The upper blue spikes are larkspur as well. Okay? So I can't go anywhere without talking about antique roses, and that's my favorite subject to talk about. So I'm going to try to move through it as quickly as I can. Melanie reminded me I only have 3.5 hours for this whole program. So I'll go as quick as I can. So when you talk about, or Deborah will help me get through it. That's even better. That's even better. All right, Deborah, if the program's not moving like you want it, just boom, move it on through. So at any rate, antique roses, by strict definition, is any variety of rose that belongs to a class of roses that have been in existence since 1867 or prior to 1867. Sarah and I can talk for days, can't we, Sarah, about old garden roses. We love our antique roses. And so by strict definition, pre-1867, what's the big deal? 1867 is the year the first modern hybrid tea rose was introduced. So anything pre-existing it, according to the American Rose Society, our Rose Authority, is considered an antique. But more importantly, what are the characteristics? Why should you care about the roses our grandmothers grew? 3 reasons. First and foremost, they smell like roses. Doesn't that seem like a silly thing to say? But modern rose breeding from 1867 on has been directed primarily by the florist industry. And what did the florist industry want? Long stems, big flowers, bright colors. And they achieved it. They got it. You go into any florist and you can find a dozen of the prettiest roses, formal shape, beautiful colors, all of that. I would much rather have an arrangement like each of you have in the center of your tables today, personally. But they achieved their goal at the expense of some great attributes. So when we go back to our grandmother's roses, pre-1867, we're going to find fragrance. Secondly, we're going to find great shape. Modern roses were bred for long stems, so naturally those roses have upright, angular growth habits. If you go back to the shrubs of the old Chinas and the old teas, they're as wide as they are tall. I like to describe them as fat and happy. These old garden roses can become an element of your garden that are not just important for the flower shape, but for the shrub shape, or like the climbers, for their overall shape, with flowers and foliage from the bottom to the top. So in addition to fragrance and great shape, antique roses offer us a third characteristic that's critically important, and that's disease resistance. Disease resistance. Now, that doesn't mean they're disease proof. This rose, Alberic Barbier, can still get black spot or powdery mildew if the conditions are just right. The difference is, how does it handle it? If it gets a little bit of black spot or powdery mildew without spray, it can yellow the leaf, drop it, and keep on moving. It re-leafs, it grows back out, it flowers on time. As long as I've fed it, it's a happy camper. So I love the old garden roses for those 3 reasons, and I want to just show you a few that are in landscape uses. Where can you use landscape roses? Well, a rambler like Alberic Barbier is a wonderful cover for an arbor. It's a spring bloomer. It's a member of the species class, and the closest relative of this that you and I all know is Lady Banks. How many of you have grown Lady Banks rose? Oh my gosh. You know, you may have never thought of it as an antique rose, but it was introduced in 1824. It comes from Asia. It came into Charleston, South Carolina, and it was introduced and very quickly became the Charleston rose. So if you ever see writing about Charleston rose, they're talking about the thornless yellow Lady Banks. And that's a sister to this one. Okay. Another rambler I love, this is Leontine gervais, and it's maybe one of the best representatives of the rambler category. Rambler simply means if you grew that rose and I had not trained it over that door, it would just simply ramble along the top of the ground. You could lift those canes up and they're very flexible, so very easy to train, and that's in contrast to climbers. So climbers typically produce long canes, very thick, like fishing pole canes, right? And so a bit more technique is needed when you're training those. Ramblers, you simply lay it over whatever you want to train it over and it'll keep on going. I love Leontine gervais. It's kind of an apricot color, good spring bloomer, and again for about 6 to 8 weeks. I got carried away on this, and so I want to warn you, this was mine and Shelley's first home when we moved to Jemison. We're starting the farm, and it was in a subdivision. So you know how subdivisions are. You might have only this much space of planting right up against your house. So they've done driveway, house. You've only got that much room. So the only choice you've really got is to go vertical. And that's one of the things that these ramblers and climbers allow us to do, to really go vertical with your landscape. And I think they can add such charm to a landscape as well. But I will tell you, you should not go any higher with a rose than you're willing to climb on a ladder. So, and my wife Shelley finally said, enough. And then I was glad that she did. The year we moved from this house was the year where I was really getting a little too old to be up on that ladder, up that high. Okay. One of the other classes, those first two were species. One of the first classes of roses that were introduced and recognized as repeat flowering were the China class of roses. There were single-petaled versions of the Chinas in existence 1,000 years before the birth of Christ. So what do they offer to your landscape? A fruity aroma. The first roses to bloom in your garden will be the China roses, like Old Blush. And they will be the last to finish. In Noonan, Georgia, Old Blush will be in bloom at Christmas, which I like. But look at that flower. That flower's not going to win best of show, right? This is a workhorse rose. This is get it out there and get it into the garden, and you want some blooms for sure. Okay? Mutabilis, another good example. I love this one as both a shrub or a small climber. It also exhibits a characteristic that's unique to the China roses. Look at that lighter colored rose. That is how it looks on day one. To the right, the darker color, the pink, and then ultimately to a crimson, that's the second, third, fourth day. They open light and age dark. And normally the reverse is true of flowers, certainly in the South, because they age out and they lighten up with sun scald. Okay? Now it gets exciting. Between the 1830s and the 1860s, the old garden tea rose came into southern gardens in a big way. This is the first time that we see a pointed bud, that we see layers of petals, a double-flowered form. The old garden tea name comes from the fragrance. The fragrance of these roses is supposed to smell like cool, dried tea leaves. So a very sweet aroma. I love the double-flowered nature. And then if you look to the right of that bloom in the center, that's that bronze-colored new growth. And that's a characteristic that's unique to the old teas as well. They were a natural cross between a China rose, the Old Blush, and Rosa gigantea, an Asian native rose. The cross occurred, and out of that came these big pointed buds, double-flowered roses. And between the 1830s and the 1860s, you had to have them. Okay. Now, big changes occurred once we get to the late 1800s and we're post-antique rose. There's still great roses being introduced that have the characteristics that we like. And one of those classes is the polyantha class. The polyantha class is the one that includes the sweetheart rose. Many of you have maybe grown or heard of the sweetheart rose. It's a member and a sister to this climbing pinky. Climbing pinky is a wonderful thornless climber that we love, and we've used it here on the west side of the farmhouse where it gets morning shade. It is in shade up until 12:30, 1 p.m. and then it gets hammered with that hot afternoon sun. And it thrives in that kind of condition, but it could also be just as happy in 8 hours of sunlight. But the polyanthas offer us both climbers and shrubs. The shrubs in this class are 2 to 3 feet tall and that wide, and they are heavy bloomers, whereas the old garden tea class are primarily spring and fall bloomers, intermittent in the summer. The polyanthas love it when it's 100 degrees. So by incorporating multiple classes of roses, you can keep roses in your garden in bloom from March all the way through Christmas. Okay. Pearl d'Or, this is one of the sisters to the sweetheart rose. Do you recognize that sweetheart characteristic, that beautiful bud, and then those beautiful layers? So small individual blooms and cluster, that's your polyantha. Okay. And then there's a hybrid perpetual here. This one is another precursor to the modern hybrid tea. The hybrid perpetuals are longer stem, so we get a nice cutting opportunity, bigger individual flower, wonderful fragrance for sure. And that one's called Marchesa Bocelli. And then this is Katy Road Pink here. This is a wonderful found rose originally. I was very fortunate while I was a graduate student. Shelley and I got to participate and go out rose rustling with a group, and we called ourselves, along with the group, we called ourselves the Texas Rose Rustlers. Doesn't that sound like a rough crowd to hang out with, for sure? You can imagine motorcycles, rose tattoos. We were all over the place. So this rose was found by one rose rustler and given its study name, Katy Road Pink. So if you're rose rustling, you go out to old home sites. You go find where these roses are growing without anybody caring for them. This rose was found outside of Katy, Texas, on the way to Houston, Texas, and it was an abandoned home. And it was circulated. The process goes, you get these roses, you root them from stem cuttings, very straightforward process, and then you grow them out, and then you circulate them around the U.S. to knowledgeable rosarians. You just say, hey, we don't know who this is. Can somebody tell us who this is? So it goes around, and now they can DNA test these things. But you try to find out what it is. And if you don't find the name, but yet it's a worthwhile enough rose, it sticks around for a while until you get your ID, or it goes into the trade as the study name. And that's what happened with this one. Katy Road Pink is a shoulder-high height rose that's that wide that blooms spring, summer, fall, and produces hips. And if you're not familiar with it, the rose hip is a beautiful fruit made by the rose, which was the original reason roses were grown, because of its high vitamin C content. It's an herb. So if you've ever had rosehip tea or rosehip jam, then you know about rose hips. But way back, if there weren't enough citrus to go around and to put on ships with sailors, they would send them with rose hips so that they didn't get scurvy. So it's a wonderful high vitamin C fruit, but it's also beautiful just to leave hanging out there on the plant. Roses are deciduous, so they lose their leaves in the winter. And after that fall flush of bloom, you can see Katy Road Pink looking like you've just hung little orange, round, quarter-size, nickel to quarter-size decorations all over it. So really a neat component. Well, it was circulated around the U.S. It was planted all over. The Antique Rose Emporium got it, propagated it as Katy Road Pink circulated it, and finally, it came to light probably 10 or 11 years after it was introduced that rose was actually called Carefree Beauty, and it was introduced by Dr. Griffith Buck. And if you are a rosarian, you will recognize the Buck name. He's introduced a whole series called Buck Roses, which are really great roses. Interestingly, for you and I in our southern gardens, he was from Iowa State, and he was breeding roses that could survive Canadian winters. So it interests me that this rose was found outside of Houston, Texas, on the way to Katy, Texas, and it can survive a Houston, Texas summer, but it can also survive a winter in Quebec. Not many plants can do that. I don't think I could do that, for sure. But it, to me, is quite interesting. And I'll never forget, we did find a specimen of this over visiting with Felder Rushing, and Melanie and Deborah have heard me tell this story a dozen times, but it always hammers the point home to me of why we need to be looking for and finding these great at risk of being forgotten about roses. Obviously the ornamental value, the fragrance, and the diversity, but I remember us going from College Station, Texas to Jackson, Mississippi to go rose rustling with Felder Rushing. Have any of you ever heard Felder speak from Mississippi? Crazy gardener. He is so fun to work with, a writer and a great speaker. And he'll lead you through all kinds of garden tours. But he took us to a cemetery, to Rose Russell, where the last person that had been buried there was in the mid-1800s. And I was so excited about it, and it was early morning. We got out there, and this beautiful cemetery, it was kind of, overcast, a nice little fog in there, and you look around and you see these old tombstones and these beautiful, graceful arching canes of these roses that are in full bloom in October because it's such a good month for a lot of our repeat bloomers to come in for their third or fourth big flush of bloom. And it was so quiet. It was so peaceful. It was just amazing. The only sound you could hear was our little clippers, clip, 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 putting our little cuttings in our buckets of water until Felder said, "Jason." And I said, "What?" He said, "Look around you and tell me what you see." He was teaching us, as students. And so I described for him what I've just described for you. He said, "I want you to remember one thing from today if you don't remember anything else." He said, "If dead people can grow these roses, you can grow these roses." And I thought, that's the most brilliant thing I've ever heard of. So I was hooked. I was hooked at that point. And then I think we got one more, Deborah, in there on roses. There is the rose that survived Hurricane Katrina. Many of you will have remembered the story about this one. This one, I was introduced. This is the home that I worked at with Dr. Welch, so taking care of that Victorian garden. And at the time, that rose had been shared with Dr. Welch by Peggy Martin as a study rose. It had never been introduced. It didn't have a name, but it had been grown by Peggy, who was the past president of the New Orleans Old Garden Rose Society. It had been grown by her through her family 3 generations back. So that's New Orleans, Baton Rouge, Médéire, all over some of the most challenging, hot, humid climates, and it thrived. And then when Hurricane Katrina occurred, of course, Peggy and her husband had evacuated, and they come back home. I mean, it's 4 months before they could get back to the home. There's no sign of the home, no sign of any of the outbuildings, anything there. 2 plants had survived. There was a sprout of this Peggy Martin rose that was coming back up, and then there was a crinum lily that had pushed up, the old-fashioned milk and wine lily. And so Dr. Welch jumped into action. He said, "Jason, I want you to propagate this rose. We've got the Antique Rose Emporium and Chambly's Roses. You guys are going to propagate it. We're going to name it Peggy, and we're going to ship that all over. And for every rose that you ship, I want you to give $1 back to build green spaces in New Orleans, Louisiana." And that's what we did. So that's where that rose has its history. But before I knew it as Peggy Martin, I knew it as the air conditioning rose. And my job was to keep that rose from swallowing the air conditioning. That rose, thankfully, is a thornless climber, but I don't know, when you tell it 30 to 40 feet, that I think it laughs at that. I have seen that rose go 45, 50 feet. One rose in 25 feet in every direction. I'm thankful it has thornless canes, but I spent a lot of time pruning that rose. But we have shipped it to Washington State. I've shipped it to Miami, Florida. I've shipped it to Schenectady, New York, and everybody has success with that rose. So it is a rambler. If you have room in your landscape, if you've got a large structure, if you have a neighbor you need to disappear, this is a rose. Okay. All right. So let's talk about some annuals, more reliable than rain, for sure, okay? Johnny Jump Ups. Here's the grandmama of the modern pansy. And I'm going to tell you, these grandmoms are tougher than their granddaughters. Pick a viola nowadays. This is the original viola tricolor, that reseeds itself throughout the garden. You plant it now by seed or by transplant. It will bloom through fall, bloom through winter, bloom into spring. When it gets too hot, it goes to seed, and then all the seed come back the next year. Okay? Larkspur, one of my very favorite reseeding annuals. This is a member of the Delphinium family that you and I can grow successfully. Delphiniums are a wonderful, quintessential cottage garden plant, but they're very, very unhappy with our climate. But the reseeding annual form of the Delphinium, the Larkspur, does exceptionally well. And you can throw $1 worth of seed out in October, November on top of your mulch in a garden, and it will germinate late winter, early spring, come up, bloom, make a glorious show. And then when it dies and goes to seed, you clip it, shake the seed off, and they'll come back again the next year. And what reseeding annuals like Johnny Jump Up and Larkspur do in our garden is fill in the holes where otherwise weeds are going to fill in. Okay? Cornflower or bachelor's button does the same. Okay? Peony poppies. Love poppies. In the first slide we looked at was California poppy, right? But this is the time that we can also be planting Papaver somniferum, the wonderful old-fashioned peony poppies. They will reseed themselves. They're not as reliable as the California poppy, but no matter where that comes up, nobody has ever walked into our display garden and go, you know, I don't really like that peony poppy right there. You should have planted it over there. They reseed themselves. They walk around and they look pretty no matter where they are, and they always capture your attention, and they're tough. Okay? There we go. And that's the combination. I like that. Okay. Perennials. How about some plants that come back every year, not just from the root, but not just from the seed, pardon me, but from the root or the crown. Okay? If you've got shade and have not grown this perennial, if you've only been offered hostas and ferns, please think about adding just the old-fashioned hellebore, the Lenten rose. These perennials are wonderful for shade, they are evergreen, and they are drought tolerant, and deer don't eat them. That's everything you need to have in a shade perennial. So if you feel like you're challenged in shade, start here. You're going to have success. They're going to multiply. And then it'll build your confidence going in to add other things to the mix. Okay. Bear's breeches. This is a nice one. I didn't do a very good job with this slide, but in the foreground, those are Thomas Jefferson's calendula, the old pot marigold. I love them. You can plant those right now, and they'll flower some in the fall, they'll hold through the winter, and then they'll bloom in the spring, and then they reseed themselves. Behind it is the plant I'm trying to feature, and that's Bear's breeches, Acanthus mollis, a wonderfully historically significant shade perennial that has a leaf that looks like a massive arugula, for sure. I'm afraid it looks like that to deer, for sure. And they have no trouble eating it, all of it. But if you don't have deer issues, that is a great evergreen shade perennial that looks beautiful. And we use it, and again, in our unirrigated landscape, and in the heat of the summer when it's been as dry as it has, it dies down. We clip it away, and even though we've not had significant rainfall, it's already coming back out with beautiful shiny leaves, which will be glorious all winter long. After about 3 years, it will put up a flower spike that comes up in the middle, like you're seeing there, about 3.5, 4 feet tall, white and purple, beautiful spike of bloom. Other than deer, it doesn't have a common insect or disease problem and has a modified root, so it's very, very drought tolerant. But it goes back to the Roman period. You can see patterns of the acanthus leaf on columns. Okay? That was originally grown as a medicinal herb called leadwort. I like it. It's also called hardy plumbago. It's just a low-growing ground cover that can grow in dappled light. I've grown it in full sun. And it sprawls and spreads, and it blooms off and on throughout the season. So some in the spring, some in the summer, some in the fall. But it holds its foliage. Unless it's a severe winter as we had this past winter, it keeps its foliage all winter long. If it dies back, it comes right back from the root. Okay? Spigelia. This is a Georgia, Alabama native. Spigelia marylandica. Goes right up into Maryland. It's oftentimes called Indian pink. And we love that one for sure. This guy is a spring bloomer, freezes to the ground in the winter, comes right back from the base, and that is in your shade garden, a wonderful shade native. Spring bloomer. Okay. Amsonia, a plant that also is a Georgia native. It's starting to get a lot more attention, Amsonia, sometimes called blue star. The light blue bloom is star-shaped. It's hard to see from far away, but the spring bloom is beautiful, but the fall color is gold. So it makes a dual-edged sword before it dies down in the winter to return back in the spring. And thankfully, when it comes back in the spring, it always brings friends, which I really like. Okay. And then catmint. Look at how much Ghost is loving that catmint. This picture was right before Ghost's sister dove into the middle of that catmint. They had two different reactions. Nepeta, this is a variety called Six Hills Giant. There's another called Walker's Low. But I love catmint. It does not spread like traditional mints, spearmint and chocolate mint, that disappear underground only to appear further down. Nepeta grows on top of the ground. It's a wonderful disease-resistant, insect-resistant perennial that's low-growing for us that makes beautiful blue spikes of blooms. And it does it spring, and it does it summer, and it does it fall, and deer don't eat it. So catmint, nepeta, tons of varieties that are coming out that I think are worth checking. But it continues to perform well in the same kind of conditions. Half a day of sunlight or more, no irrigation system needed. Just an extremely tough perennial. And every time it finishes to bloom, you hammer it back. You cut it back to 2 or 3 inches, it flushes out and does it all again. Hammer it back after it finishes blooming and keep that going throughout spring, summer, and fall. Okay? Salvias. Now we could I'm going to probably spend the last 2.5 hours on salvias, Melanie. This is my favorite perennial to talk about. If you got a half a day of sun or more, you got to grow salvias. Amy, am I right? Come on. Amy and I are big fans of the salvias because butterflies and hummingbirds and bees love salvias, but deer don't eat them. So pick a perennial salvia. You don't have just annual salvias to choose from. You have perennial salvias that will perform exceptionally well in central Georgia. The Salvia gregias are just one example. Salvia gregias include tons of colors: pink, raspberry, white, red, but they're 2.5, 3 feet tall. They'll get that wide, and they are evergreen during our average winters. So that means after they finish a spring flush of bloom, you prune them. Don't waste your time just cutting each individual bloom. Get in there and whack them back. They'll flush back out. They'll bloom throughout the summer. When they slow down, whack them back. They flower through the fall. And then when they finish that, whack them back. They're going to be evergreen, but if you don't prune them, they'll develop thickened woody tissue like rosemary does, and then they only bloom out on the tips. So be diligent with your clippers and keep your clippers sharp for sure. Look at that thing. Forsythia sage only blooms in the late summer, fall. And I started with 3 little 4-inch plants in there. That's Salvia madrensis. And at any rate, obviously we've had to thin that back a little bit. But I'd much rather thin it back than replace it every year, for sure. Okay? Blackberry lily, July and August is when this perennial blooms. If you bloom in July or August, you should get a blue ribbon, for sure. This is an 1820s introduction from China. Its botanical name is Bellum canda chinensis. They've since changed Bellum canda, but I can't change. Those taxonomists just have too much time on their hands for sure. So blackberry lily has an iris member in its parentage. So it has sword-like evergreen leaves. These beautiful star-shaped blooms with the freckles come out July, August. And then they finish blooming. They set seed. You can see the green pod in the middle. The green pod's beautiful. And then when it's getting to fall, it turns tan, opens up, and reveals the seed in the exact shape and color of a blackberry. And so not only is it evergreen and perennial, multiplying from the base, but it also drops seed, and those seed come back. Okay? And now we're moving into the fall. It's time for chrysanthemums. I tend to gravitate to both the traditional, these gorgeous mums right here are more traditional that we use on our walkways or in containers or on the porch. These guys, like Chrysanthemum Ryan's Pink, are the Chrysanthemum morpholeums, the long stem that my grandmother called October daisies. So, you know, they get long stem, you can cut and bring them inside, and then when they're out blooming, they're multiplying. They're out in the garden getting bigger and fuller and growing. And they start blooming typically August, September. They bloom right up into our frost. So they're nice for a low maintenance, rewarding fall blooming perennial. Okay? That's them kind of out in motion. Now I want you to focus on the flowers and not on the spurge in the walkway. Everybody just focus on those flowers. I got to tell you, that is a horrible weed for sure. Okay? All right, some shrubs, some of the anchors that we have in the garden. Deutzia, this is in the foreground. So look at that. This beautiful rose right here, photobombing, that's an old garden tea called Sambrui, but the white shrub behind it is the old-fashioned Deutzia, Deutzia gracilis. I love the history of these. Most of us are used to, in a southern garden, in gardens like hills and dales, they would have had Deutzia scabra, the fuzzy Deutzia. And this is the dwarf version of that. It comes from the Netherlands. In fact, the fellow that introduced it was the sheriff of the town that came from. His last name was Deutz, D-E-U-T-Z. I want to live in a town where the sheriff has time to garden. Is that, I mean, come on. That's a safe place, I'm thinking, for sure. You go into the coffee shop and that sheriff is talking about his daffodils that he's going to grow. But at any rate, so Deutzia, dwarf Deutzia, 3 to 4 feet tall, blooms before the leaves even come out on that deciduous shrub. And then the leaves come out and it still has flowers. So it's one of the early spring bloomers. Okay. Virginia sweetspire, a Georgia native. This is a selection that's called Henry's Garnet that would grow in Georgia along creeks, where when the wintertime the water rises, the root systems are literally submersed in that moisture. And then in the summertime when the creeks are down, they're high and dry. It doesn't matter. Those blooms occur during the spring and they look like an upside down white butterfly bush. Light fragrance that bees love. So it's a great native for our pollinators. In the fall, that foliage turns burgundy red. It multiplies by underground stems. So you've got one plant here and all of a sudden you're going to see some new, what we would call suckers coming up. So this plant colonizes. It's very, very, very worthwhile to have in a landscape in sun or dappled light. Okay? And then Spirea Anthony Water. A lot of the Spireas that I love to talk about are the traditional Chinese Spireas introduced in the mid-1800s, but this is a Japanese Spirea, Spirea japonica or Bumalda, and it produces an umbel-shaped bloom. Spirea Anthony Water, about 3 feet tall, about that wide. A lot of the newer introductions like the double play series like candy corn that have got beautiful foliage, they fall into this category. This is the granddad of all of those guys, but no matter which one you plant, they're wonderful to have for a repeat bloom sequence, spring, summer, and fall. One of the unique things about the Anthony Water is it always produces an albino shoot. So you've got all these green leaves and you get that white shoot, but pink blooms cover it spring, summer, and fall. But it doesn't have a common insect or disease problem, and it's drought tolerant. And that is the underlying theme under each and every one of these plants that we're talking about. Okay. Annabelle, Georgia native. Isn't that pretty? I remember going to one of my favorite talks, and that was at Callaway Gardens, and that's been years ago, and it was, oh gosh, let me think. It was all about hydrangeas, and then we talked about, we talked about, we had Mike Durr there. And Dr. Durr, if you don't know, was a wonderful professor at University of Georgia, and he literally wrote the book that we studied about woody plants. He has a manual of woody landscape plants, and that was our text. And he had talked about a lot of these natives, and this was one of the ones that he indicated was one of his very favorites. And the neat thing about the Annabelle hydrangea is its common name is the smooth hydrangea, Hydrangea arborescens, and it's native to shade. But yet, that hydrangea at 3 to 4 feet in height can bloom in full blazing sun as it is here, as well as dappled light. But one of the unique things about it is it blooms on new growth. So we talked about the polar plunge that we all went through. Christmas Eve drops to 9.6 degrees. So not only, now you know a plant nerd, I can tell you my soil temperature, but because my dad has 2 weather stations on our farm, we can tell you the exact temperature. So it wasn't 9 or 10, it was 9.6 degrees on Christmas Eve. And then 4 days, we did not get above 32. We did not get above freezing. That hydrangea was dormant. There was not a stem or a leaf that was damaged. It flowered this year on time because it flowers on new growth. That's pretty remarkable for sure. Okay. Lacecap hydrangeas, that flower didn't have a bloom anywhere on it. That hydrangea got smashed in December, right? I love my mop heads and I love my lace caps, but those hydrangeas set their blooms on last year's growth. So by August, it already had flower buds. And on December 24th, when we hit 9.6, those poor flower buds were smoked. And so we had the prettiest foliage on the bluebird hydrangea this year, or blue wave, that we've ever had. Okay. Lilac chase tree. How many of you are growing this? If you like bees, this is your tree. This is a multi-trunk tree called Vitex agnus castus. Its common name is lilac chase tree. It's as drought tolerant and as tough as any small tree that you could put into your landscape. Multi-trunked, no common insect or disease problem. Beautiful bloomer for summer. Okay. And then this is a modern name, a modern selection of an old hydrangea. Our grandmothers grew Hydrangea paniculata grandiflorus. Those were collectively referred to as PG hydrangeas. Limelight is a new variety of the old-fashioned paniculata grandiflorus. And I believe after the success that we have seen, how many of you have a limelight or limelight type? Is everybody happy? Is anybody unhappy with them? That's what I mean. We will see Melanie, we're going to see a new variety of these introduced every year, if not 2 or 3. There are now so many varieties of paniculata grandiflorus out there that I've lost count. In the nursery today, we're growing one called pufferfish that I love, one called Bobo, strawberry vanilla. We've got that Pinky Winky. We're growing limelight. We're growing limelight prime, little lime. And I lose track, but that's how strong this hydrangea is performing in landscapes around the United States. So it's everywhere, and this hydrangea, like the Annabelle, blooms on new growth. So this year, we didn't miss a beat. It's got drought tolerance. And so here it is out on a dry stream bed at our farm next to a bridge, next to the pond, where it's performing beautifully. And so it doesn't have a lot of requirements. It doesn't have a lot of wants. It fits neatly into our theme of tough plants for southern gardens. And what we're hearing from gardeners everywhere we go is that we'd better be collecting all the varieties, because the gardeners we're talking to would like all of the varieties, for sure. I was in, I was in Tupelo, Mississippi last week, and they've got an evaluation where they were looking at all of these varieties. It's the first time I've seen a solid evaluation, firelight, little firelight. And so what they're trying to find are options for us to have in our small spaces in the garden as well as big spaces in the garden. And they were all performing well, for sure. Many of them dry a different color than they bloom. They'll all be white when they open and bloom, but some of them, like firelight, dry more of a reddish pink. So I think these are really, really worthwhile new varieties of an old-fashioned shrub that you might want to consider, especially if you have a half a day of sun or more. Okay. Fothergilla. This is the one we were just talking about this past week. This is a native witch alder, it's sometimes called, but this is the dwarf version of Fothergilla that's native to Georgia. The blooms in the spring look like little white sea urchins to me that are all over that plant with not a leaf on it. But in the fall, with shade, you get this wonderful red-orange color for over a month. So it's a tough shrub, multi-trunked, like the Virginia sweetspire, gives us both spring bloom and fall interest without a common pest problem. Okay. Oh, I love this one. And this is a nice introduction from Asia. If you look at that, this is the winter. This is the middle of January when this Edgeworthia is in full bloom. Edgeworthia is in the same family as winter daphne. So when you look at this, it gets a little bit taller, no leaves on it, and those are flower buds that are hanging upside down there. They have a light yellow color, and they smell so sweet. This is up there in my top 3 fragrances for the garden with gardenia and tea olive. That's where Edgeworthia fins up. But look at when it's out there. January, you remember, we're in our 2 weeks of winter. We're fully depressed. You go out and you smell this and your day is better. But it's out there on a berm with no irrigation system in sun. I first studied it at the Birmingham Botanical Gardens. The director at the time had said, Jason, you need to come and have a look at this. So we went on a little ride. We walked out there. He said, are you growing this plant? It was in the middle of January. I said, I don't even know what that plant is. And he snatched up a piece with roots still attached, and he threw it to me. He said, you need to grow it. And he was right. He was right. And it grew from that one plant. Okay. Aha! That's the slide we've been looking for. This was in our little trade magazine. Now, I live in Jemison, Alabama. That's the town I'm in. The population is 2,100 people. And this was the opportunity that you have for a lawnmower that was available in the publication called The Mule Trader. I love it. It is so good. It is so good. All right, Melanie, I know I've come up on at least 3.5 hours, for sure. So we got a lot of time. All right, all right. Well, I'll stop there, and then if we want to do questions and answers, for sure.
Like we said, we're kind of walk around, but I know people have plenty of questions, so let's.
Yes, sir.
You talked about the best time to plant. What about the best time to transplant?
To transplant. All right, question is, he's asking about, all right, we're talking about October, November being the best time to plant, but what about transplant? What if you've got something in your garden that you want to move from this spot over to the other spot? We always look for the change in temperature and the rainfall to begin in earnest. So while we can be planting anything that's grown in a container because its whole root system is contained in that pot, we don't have that luxury if we're moving it from one space to the other. So I want more moisture in the ground than what we currently have. So we oftentimes look for two changes. If it's a deciduous plant, one that loses its leaves in the winter, I want the leaves off and I want moisture in the ground. So December, January to me are two of the most ideal times to move trees, shrubs, roses. This time of the year, I can use the opportunity to prepare that plant a little bit for that move. If it's something tall and I need to prune it back, I'm going to go ahead and do that pruning right now. And in the summertime, you can even do a little bit of root pruning. If it's something that's fairly large that you're going to have to really have some help doing, you can begin to do some root pruning, and there's some good guides both on the University of Georgia's website and the Alabama Cooperative Extension website, aces.edu. There's some good examples of how to do the root pruning so that you have a smaller root system to begin with. And if you're doing that 6 months ahead of time, you're set. If it's something that is shallow rooted, some of the shallow rooted perennials, I wouldn't bother. Just cut them back and move them right now, for sure. Yes, ma'am.
2 questions on hydrangeas.
Okay.
What would be the best time to plant the limelight?
Okay.
And also, when they lose all their leaves and they're all woody, is it best to cut them back or just leave them as they are?
That is 2 great questions. She's asking questions about hydrangeas, and specifically limelight hydrangeas. So when to plant them and when to prune them. We get those 2 questions more than any other, especially with hydrangeas. We also get the same 2 questions with roses. So when to plant them, that's easy. You're just now getting to a great time to plant them. So don't be in a rush. If you're in a nursery today and you find the hydrangea that you've been looking for, get it. And then take it home. It doesn't have to be planted today. Put it over where you can reach it with your hose and water it once per day while it's in that container. Don't let it dry out. Then, when you get ready to plant it, it can be planted October, November, December. Thankfully, we live in the South and we don't even know what a frost line is. Our soil does not freeze like it does north of the Mason-Dixon line. This is the advantage we have where you cross the Mason-Dixon line. They have soil that can sometimes freeze down, depending on where you are, 10, 12 inches or more. And then whatever you would have planted in the fall would just get heaved right out of the ground. And so fall is our time for planting. But October, November, December, January, going into winter, February, we can still winter plant hydrangeas. Now, what about pruning? We made a really important distinction about the French hydrangeas. Remember the blue and the pink hydrangeas that our grandmamas grew? Love them. I love them. And they're referred to as French hydrangeas. I don't know why. They're from Asia. Isn't that funny? But it's the same reason that the state flower of Alabama is Camellia japonica. That's a different committee. So the French hydrangeas that bloom blue and pink, with the exception of now the repeat flowering hydrangeas like Endless Summer or the Just Dance series, those are going to be important parts of our gardens in the next 15, 20 years, in my opinion, because they have a repeat bloom sequence. But those French hydrangeas set their flower buds in August. And then if we get a hard freeze like 9.6 degrees, those buds are dead. But even if we hadn't gotten hit with 9.6 in the polar plunge, we still went into March fully leafed out, and the buds on the terminal ends of those hydrangeas were exposed. They didn't have leaf cover, right? The buds, you could actually see the color if there was any. They would have gotten zapped with our March freeze, which went to 24 degrees. Limelight hydrangeas, members of the Hydrangea paniculata grandiflora family, bloom on new growth. So no worries. They did not get affected by either the polar plunge because they're cold hardy farther north. They also did not get affected by the late spring freeze in March because they bloom on new growth. So pruning them can occur late February with no consequences, except great shape and more blooms than if you had not pruned them. So if your hydrangea, why would you prune a limelight hydrangea? Because it's gotten too tall or out of hand or lopsided. When do you do it? Late February, early March in Noonan, Georgia. Yes, ma'am.
Crepe myrtles,
Yes.
it got, yeah, the leaf plunge, it got hurt.
Oh, yeah.
But it produced suckers at the bottom. Did it die?
Great question. In fact, that leads me to the next question. Her crepe myrtle was damaged during the polar plunge. My camellias, Sasanqua, were damaged during the polar plunge. Around me, 1 or 2 people out of everyone I've polled had a rosemary that survived the polar plunge, right? But your crepe myrtle, my camellia, all are making new growth that's coming out from the base. The top, the whole portion of the plant didn't die. So my rationing is on this Camellia sasanqua. It was a variety called Shishigashira. It was 19 years old. The trunks that died down were that thick. I had to cut that with a chainsaw. But my rationale is I have a 19-year-old root system on this camellia, and I can retrain it with these sprouts that are growing out. Whereas if I pull the whole thing out and put a brand new camellia in, then I've got a 1-year-old root system and I'm gonna have to retrain it and get it all growing. So with your crepe myrtle, you can do the same thing if you like. Now yours is gonna be more tree form, mine's gonna be more bush form. It'll take yours a little bit longer to establish and get that same shape in the tree form, but yet it's the same exact variety. Camellias are rooted from stem cuttings, they're not grafted or budded, so you've got the options of going either route. You can stake it and retrain it, or you could replace it, but it's the same variety that's there. Yes, ma'am.
What's going to discourage squirrels, chipmunks, whatever rodents from eating my flowering plants?
So if y'all didn't hear the question, she said, what's going to keep the squirrels and the chipmunks out of my garden? He said a 22. And I don't have to explain what a 22 is to anybody in this room. Everybody knows you're good people. And so that we have found with squirrels and moles and voles, we kind of have to take a couple of different approaches. With moles and voles, they are following a tunnel system. The voles have created, the moles follow it. I believe it's in that order. But they're after a food source, right? So they're after grubs, they're after earthworms, they're after all of those little insects that live under soil. So you can deter that by tackling the food source with a grub killer or something along those lines. You also can use a deterrent. I have been really pleased with all of the deterrents that have let's see, it is the stuff, the medicine that nobody likes taking. What's it? Camphor. But there's another one. What is the? It's a type of oil. Castor, thank you. That's it. So the castor oil is now being manufactured and made into a granular form. They absolutely abhor castor bean and castor oil. So you put that out literally with your fertilizer spreader. It's activated through rainfall that pushes it into the soil, and for 5 or 6 weeks, it has worked effectively for moles and voles to keep them out of our area. By then, they're finding other food sources typically, but I always do it 2 times if I have a particularly heavy population.
Is it
safe for pets?
The castor oil in the granular form is, I think, safe for pets. I've got 2 dogs, 3 cats. They've never shown an interest, thankfully, in it. And unlike iron phosphide, which kills the mole or vole, you can use that. If they eat that, then they can get sick, for sure.
Does that work on armadillo?
You know what works for armadillos better than that? I have found, and this was endorsed by the Rose Society, is milorganite. Milorganite was introduced as a deer deterrent, and I have had effectiveness not only with deer for 4 or 5 weeks, but with armadillos. And has anybody used milorganite? Okay, good. For those of you who have not used it, it is a processed sewage sludge. There's no way to make that sound good, right? But it has the aroma of what you think a processed sewage sludge should have, and you will smell it easily for 2 days. But deer can detect that for up to 4 to 5 weeks. So it has been a very effective deer deterrent. Now, I don't have the heaviest population, right? I'm farming on what was a plum orchard, so it never was the deer pathway. So they come up on the edge, they'll nibble a little bit here and there, and I know they're there. I put my milorganite out, and what milorganite does that I appreciate is it's also a fertilizer. It's 6% nitrogen, 2% phosphorus, it's no potassium, but it's 5% iron. I can use that on my grass when it's dry. I can use it on my roses, and it does more than just deter deer. It actually is an organic fertilizer. But if you are having company coming over, don't put that out. You're just going to deal with the deer, for sure, until after the company leaves, for sure. Yes, ma'am.
I've had issues this year with my roses with beetles, so what do you use
Beetles.
to get rid of the growth?
Oh yeah, so Japanese beetle, right? Yes. So if you're not familiar, she's asking about an insect pest that loves the blooms of crepe myrtles, loves roses, leaves and all, loves plums, loves blackberries, and it is a pest that we didn't have, probably 20 years ago, or certainly not in the volume that we see it now. And it looks like a June bug, like a small June bug with metallic green color on the sides. And it is the only good news about a Japanese beetle is that it is an adult feeding for only 6 weeks. But they can do a lot of damage as an adult, but they only have 1 life cycle. And so that's how we're going to try to target them. But during that 6-week period, which is often for us the 1st of June, just like it is for you, right on in through the 1st of July, they can eat a lot. And some of the common approaches that we've taken before are not good approaches. For instance, the traps. The trap has a pheromone. The idea is you hang a trap here and your roses are over here and the Japanese beetles come to the trap. But there's so large a volume of them that the pheromone continues to work even after the trap is full. So you're bringing those Japanese beetles into your yard. And then they're still coming, the pheromone's working, and this hotel's full, so they're just going to feed on your roses while they're there. I've had it suggested that you give those to your neighbor. Down the road. I can't endorse that, but now that works on killing the adults that are in there. And then I think that there are a couple of multi-pronged approaches. There is a beneficial soil fungi called milky spore. And milky spore is an effective way to eliminate safely the grub stage of the Japanese beetle as well as other grubs. But it is not a quick process. It requires you putting that out in stages over about a 2-year period to develop it. Now, ultimately, it's good, but, we're impatient gardeners, aren't we? So to address the adult for that 6 weeks outside of while you're trying to address the grub stage, there are both conventional and organic pesticides that are effective. So what we typically do is we take kind of a dual-edged approach. Our roses are what Japanese beetles love the best. So they're coming in about the 1st of June. That's on the tail end of my big spring flush of bloom. So I take that opportunity to reduce the height and prune my roses by 1/3 of their overall height after that spring flush of bloom to deny the Japanese beetles 2 or 3 weeks worth of food. And if they don't find it there, they're moving on to my neighbor where he hasn't pruned his roses. So then I can deny them for 2 to 3 weeks, half their lifespan. When they come back out, and if I still have a large population, I will use an organic pesticide. The active ingredient is spinosad. And I like that because it's a softer material, it's very effective on soft-bodied and hard-bodied insects, and it kills Japanese beetles. So I've had good success with that. And that has worked very, very well. But outside of that, we control the grub stage, then we can control the adult 6-week life cycle, and that's kind of the approach we've taken. Jim Scott gave a wonderful program. In fact, it was here in Georgia, and Jim Scott is an attorney, retired attorney, who's a big, big gardener. And if you've not had an opportunity, his gardens are open, and they're on Lake Martin in Alabama, and a beautiful day. But he is a character. He is so fun to talk with and to visit with. And he was making a presentation. He was telling me about to 3 groups of garden clubs, all ladies, one year. And they asked the question that you've asked. They said, how do you get rid of Japanese beetles? And he said, I have the cure for Japanese beetles. Well, I mean, Deborah, it was so quiet. You could have heard a pin drop in a room as big as this, right? Everybody was on the edge of their seat, and he said, I have planted the shrub Althea, Rose of Sharon, a great old-fashioned plant, right? They like Rose of Sharon and shrub Althea more than anything else in his garden, and he hates shrub Althea. Now, that is one character flaw. I don't know what's wrong with Jim. It's a perfectly good plant. Shrub Althea or Rose of Sharon, he hates them. So he planted a hedge over here because it's a trap crop. All the Japanese beetles come in, they go out to that trap crop, and then he sprays the devil out of that, and he kills them all, and they stay out of his garden. Well, he was explaining this, and then one of the ladies in the back held her hand up. She said, does it kill both the good Japanese beetles and the bad Japanese beetle? And he looked at her and he said, I don't think I'm following you. Repeat the question. She said, does it kill the good as well as the bad Japanese beetle? He said, I don't know what you're talking about. She said, well, when I go out in the morning, she said, there's always one Japanese beetle that's just got its head buried into my roses, but there's one behind it trying to pull it off of that. And Jim, bless him, he was waiting for this opportunity. And he said, lady, he said, that is a fraternity party going on your roses. There's no good Japanese beetle. So at any rate, yes, ma'am. Is it? Are we okay time-wise, or?
No. Okay. I wanted to talk about a few plants that didn't get mentioned. They were back here. There was a lady that was asking about over here this olive.
Yeah.
I bought this olive at Petals maybe 2 years ago.
Yeah.
And it is damaged. I repotted it in a big pot, and it's like this big. The only time I've taken it inside was during the polar plunge.
Yeah.
And I just struck it in and hit the garage when it went down to 9.
Are we okay time-wise? Is that okay? Is that all right?
I'm going to ask you questions about how to fertilize your roses.
Okay. You want me to
I think a
cover
lot of
that?
people don't.
No, I'll do that.
But if anybody has any more other questions,
We'll tackle that.
I can talk about the olive real quick, and
Yeah.
then just feature a couple more plants. Then we can continue a little bit, or we'll go to your project.
I'm-
I don't want these to be overlooked, especially because all these are unique plants. Most of them we cannot find locally.
Thank you.
Olive tree's one of them.
Yay. I appreciate that. The olive that we're talking about too is the Spanish olive. It's the Arbequina olive, right? And one of the neat things about them is that they are self-fruitful. And in fact, the first productive olive press that I was aware of is in South Georgia. And they are actually producing and growing these olives like they're using blueberry mechanical harvesters. In fact, so they've pruned them into hedges. But if you let it grow like Melanie's talking about, it makes a beautiful either single trunk or multi-trunk small tree. Evergreen during the winter, has small white cream-colored blooms in the spring, and you can have one olive and it makes fruit all by itself. But olives, as I learned the hard way, do not ripen on the tree, right? You're not going to be able to walk out to olive and pop it in your mouth, or you will chip a tooth for sure. There are processes like the brining solution that it goes through if you want it to swell and to be then seeded and stuffed with a pimento that are wonderful. So the brining solution, I tried it one time. I'm not going to do it. It's too much involved, and I don't grow enough olives to do the press. I just grow it because it's, as Melanie mentioned, a beautiful tree. And I love to be able to say, oh yeah, I grow olives. I definitely grow olives. It's a nice one to have. Oh, I forgot about that one. Thank you for holding flowers in the spring, just like all blueberries do, with small, white, bell-shaped blooms. So the bees love it. Great source of nectar and pollen for your bees. And then it makes fruit. The fruit is very, very sweet, but they are a little bit bigger than a BB. So it would take all of us an hour to fill 1 pint. But your birds will love you for planting that. No two ways about it. Your birds will love you for planting that one. Now that guy, is that the Pieris? Yes. So if you've got a shade garden, the first time that we saw that, of course, there's so many great plants. I grew up in Auburn, so I was at Callaway Gardens pretty regularly. I just have such fond memories of always being there. But the Pieris was one of those nice arching small shrubs that you can grow with afternoon shade. But Pieris japonica doesn't like central Georgia as much as that particular Taiwan native Pieris. That's a bit more heat tolerant. It's a bit more forgiving, and it's a selection called Temple Bells. It's evergreen during the winter. It has kind of a cool, irregular shape, and the flower buds are already set. So it's kind of like a mountain laurel almost. Flower buds are set, they'll open up, white bell-shaped blooms just like a blueberry because they're in the Ericaceae family, but they need a little bit of afternoon shade, and they're flowering. Temple Bells is from shoulder to head height, somewhere in that range, for sure. Yeah. Yes, there are. If you've got Salvia leucantha or Mexican bush sage, it'll be the purple velvety looking spike in your flower arrangements. It makes a gorgeous show, but it only blooms in your central Georgia gardens in the fall. So it's August, it's September, all the way through the fall, and it goes up until the day it freezes to the ground. Now it'll get easily, shoulder to head height, and I'm 6'3", somewhere in that range. So you can imagine, it's a big salvia, right? It'll freeze all the way to the ground in the winter, and it comes right back from the base in the spring with friends. But I love it. And like other salvias, Melanie, like we're talking about, bees and butterflies and hummingbirds love them, but deer don't eat them, for sure.
All right, we'll do a couple more.
Yeah.
Red rose, which you see all over the county, or
Yes. So we were talking about shrub Althea and Rose of Sharon about Jim Scott's garden, right? That's a hibiscus. That's a hibiscus, but they call it Confederate rose. And that is one of the hibiscus that freeze all the way to the ground, come back from the base in the spring at a height of 10 to 12 feet if you let them. There are several selections of that particular hibiscus. This one I collected from the entrance to Judson College, a women's college in West Alabama that's just this past year closed, but I was speaking to the Alumni Association there, and these were at the front entrance. And what's unique about those is they are double flowered, like a big old rose, white. And I was mentioning to someone that was picking one up earlier, when I loaded the one that was in bloom in the van yesterday, it was white. When we unloaded it today, it's pink. And it wasn't the transport, it wasn't the music I was listening to, or anything like that. That's the nature of it. It just opens white, ages pink, and makes a beautiful show. But anyway, good sun-tolerant hibiscus that you can put into your landscape. That's right. So the tall chrysanthemums like you see on your table right here, those beautiful white blooms, those are the ones my grandmother called October daisies, yeah. So the long stem chrysanthemums, the old-fashioned ones, there's not just a few, there's a lot, and we're working on collecting those. And as Melanie mentioned, we were visiting Jinx Farmer, who's an amazing person and just a neat gardener and writer. He, at his mother's home, has a crinum farm, right? And they were taking us on a walkthrough when we were visiting Charleston one time, and their farm is in Beach Island, South Carolina, and they're inland, so there's not a beach or an island, right? It's the beech tree that it's named for. But Jinx shared that with us, and it's taller than the Ryan's pink and a darker pink, and it flowers a little bit later. So every year it blooms as it's named, Miss Gloria's Thanksgiving Day chrysanthemum. That's where the name comes from. It's never been introduced. It's been in their family. We've circulated it all over. Nobody can tell us what the name is, so we call it Miss Gloria's Thanksgiving Day mum. Ah, and you've got a citrus.
Yes, it could be, there's a lot of citrus here, and it can withstand the cold with below freezing. It's, for me, I just pull it in the garage, so it's not a lot of trouble.
Yeah.
And I see the cara here.
Yeah.
Some keeper limes and lemons. So
That's it. That's right. So this was my dad's passion. So remember, I grew up in a family that gardened, but my dad's, he's got to eat it or he's not growing it. He's a citrus fanatic. So we grow our rootstock from seed, and he grafts all of our fruit trees. My dad turned 84 this past June, and he taught a class Sunday afternoon with 64 people, and he took them all over the farm, and then was bothered that they left a little early. It was getting dark, you know. So at any rate, he loves these citrus, and they are self-fruitful like the olive. The key on the citrus that I brought with me that Melanie mentioned, caracaras, the limes, the lemons, the satsumas, they're cold hardy to 28 degrees Fahrenheit. 28 degrees Fahrenheit only. Outside of that, they're not difficult to grow. They're not a great big challenge, but you've got to prevent them from dropping. So we container grow ours. And then like Melanie mentioned, on those evenings where it's going to be below 28, you either shift it or put it up against the south or east side of your home, drape a piece of winter cloth over it, and then you're in good shape, for sure. Kim, what was the other? Was there? Yeah, the Artemisia. So that one, we had to go further outside of Georgia and Alabama to find that Artemisia. We can grow this Dusty Miller relative really well in our landscape. But Powys Castle comes from the south of England, from that castle. And it loves the heat and it loves the drier conditions. So it's thriving out there, and it doesn't bloom. What it brings to the garden is that beautiful silver foliage, great for cut arrangements. Deer don't eat it. You need a half a day of sun, you know, at least, if not more, and no irrigation. Don't even think about putting that Artemisia on irrigation, or the lavenders, for sure. Deborah and I were talking a minute ago about roses, though. And so for fertilization, she was saying a lot of times she gets questions about roses. How do you fertilize them? One thing I would love for you to keep in mind, regardless of whether you're a modern rose grower or an old garden rose grower or just a rose grower, they love to eat. And what we've discovered over the last 30 years is that on our red clay and rock soil, we don't have any organic amendment. And so it's critically important to get the soil right to have success. The red clay that you have is a good thing. And it's hard to think of that when you're digging that hole, isn't it? It's extremely difficult to think positively about that red clay when you're digging in it. But ultimately, when you get the hole dug, it can provide a nice base, and it helps to maintain a level of moisture in your soil. Unlike the sandier soils in Georgia, where you can get a 2-inch rain and you've got to water everything the next day. That all passes through. So if we are going to plant these roses, we like to plant all of our roses, whether it's container grown or bare root. We like to dig the hole the same depth that the plant is growing. We like to dig the hole twice as wide, 1.5 to 2 times as wide, because that's going to allow that lateral root growth. We want a product like Soil Cubed, like the organic compost. It's this table right over here, blended in at a 1-to-1 ratio, so that you can loosen and condition your soil and improve it and add that organic matter. And then once you've got that into the hole, tamped in and covered, you're in business. Water it in deeply that day. And then if you're still dry the next 2 weeks, make sure that you're watering at least twice per week. Then, if you're planting this time of the year, we don't even think about fertilizing until March 15th of next year, of 2024. So March 15th, 2024, we start fertilizing. I always like to start mine out with a conventional rose food because it's a quicker release. Most conventional rose foods are going to be 14, 12, 11, and they're going to release over a 4 to 5 week period. Then, 5 weeks later, I'm going to come back with an organic rose food. I like one called Rose Tone. There are plenty of organic rose foods out there, but I love Rose Tone because what's in that bag is going to feed the soil as well as feed the rose. So then 5 weeks later, I flip-flop back to my conventional. So I fertilize every 5 weeks between March 15th and the end of September in central Alabama where we're located. And I alternate from conventional to organic. But I always start them out with compost so that we can get them off to a good start. Our soils are definitely deficient in organic matter. Yes, ma'am. That's a great question. She was asking about blue hydrangeas. Where can we get good blue hydrangeas? Well, the interesting thing is it goes back to those, goes back to the French hydrangeas, right? That we were talking about. Hydrangea macrophylla. Those are the ones that are affected by the pH of our soil. And it's the availability, of iron that is in there. And if your soil is acidic like mine, we have, anywhere you take a soil sample on our ground, the soil is about a 5.3. And remember, if you've not tested your soil, the pH scale is a logarithmic scale from 0 to 14 with 7 being neutral. Most of the soils in Georgia are like those in Alabama where you're slightly acidic or very acidic. That allows iron to be available to the hydrangea. That in turn colors your hydrangeas blue. In the absence of iron or an elevated pH, your hydrangeas are going to be pink more often than not, right? So in my soil, without having to do anything else, I could select a variety that is one of my very favorites. I have two, Penny Mac, named for Penny McHenry, who lived just up the road in Atlanta, founded the American Hydrangea Society. And I got another one called Dooley. Not because Vince Dooley was such a great football coach at University of Georgia, but because he played football for Auburn University. That's why I like him. That's why I like him. See, we could get him in here for sure. And Dooley produces this massive hydrangea, and it's a very good blue. But interestingly, Penny Mac is a repeat flowering one. Dooley is primarily a spring flowering one. And what we've learned is, in observation, the repeat flowering hydrangeas tend to be lighter blues, whereas the once blooming hydrangeas tend to be darker blues. So those are my two favorite varieties. Those are my observations. So that's how we get it. But then, right now it feels like we have a late spring freeze every year. So I feel like you've got to build a tent over your hydrangea to cover it, because it doesn't matter in January if it's 28 degrees. The 9.6 is bad. You got to cover it for that in January. But if you have a regular average January, whatever that is now, you're fine. But when those buds, look at those hydrangeas, the terminal buds on all your hydrangeas, that's where your flower buds are, right? So if you get below 28 degrees during March or early April, when those buds, those leaves are falling back and they're getting ready to throw out some blooms, that's where we're going to run into trouble and we're going to lose. They're going to freeze out. So you're going to have to go to some extra efforts on those hydrangeas during those late spring freezes to protect those buds. So good variety, good location, and winter protection. Oh, okay, very good, very good.
We'll move on and do some door prizes. Jason's not going anywhere for anytime soon.
I think I turned it off too.
We're going to swap over. I'll just take that one,
Okay.
so that we don't have any squealing noises.
There we go.
And